She was 8 months and 2 weeks pregnant when her husband carried his suitcase to the front door at 9:47 p.m. on a Wednesday in October. She was standing in the kitchen doorway in a faded yellow nightgown, her feet bare on the cool ceramic tile. One hand was pressed flat against the counter for balance. He did not say goodbye. He did not look back. The door closed with a soft click, not a slam, not a dramatic ending, just the sound of a latch catching in its frame, and then rain on the asphalt outside. And then the engine of his car reversing down Bourdieu Road until there was nothing left except the hiss of tires on wet ground, and the flicker of the overhead light she had asked him to fix for 3 weeks. The neighbor in the flat directly above, a woman who had been standing at her window with a cup of cold ginger tea since she heard the voices change in the apartment below, watched the headlights disappear at the far end of the road. She set her cup down on the sill without drinking from it. She did not know it yet, but she would be watching that same woman for the next 7 years. Neither did Dexter Owusu Boateng know that the night he left, he was not ending a story. He was beginning one. Her name was Adaize Okafor. She had been Adaize Owusu Boateng for 2 years and 4 months. But that name had walked out with the suitcase, and she was not the kind of person who chased what had already decided to leave. She was 29 years old. At 8 months pregnant, she weighed 51 kilograms, which was down from 63 before she was carrying the child. Because she had been eating 1 full meal a day since April and setting aside the second portion for the next morning, or for a time when she would need it more urgently. Her feet had swollen enough that her only comfortable shoes were a pair of flat leather slippers she had bought from a market stall in Balogun for 700 naira in September, and had worn every day since. She had 3 dresses that still fit her body at this size. A purple Ankara she had bought at Tejosho for 2,800 naira. A green shift dress she had altered herself with a seam ripper and a borrowed sewing machine, because the original cut would not accommodate her. The third was the yellow nightgown. She had washed it by hand in the bathroom sink that morning, wrung it out carefully, and hung it on the back of the door to dry. It was clean. She had no family in Lagos. Her mother had died 4 years earlier in the dry Harmattan season before her 25th birthday in a hospital ward in Enugu that smelled of disinfectant and the roasted corn from the vendor's stall below the window. Her father had remarried and moved to Port Harcourt the year she started secondary school. There was a cousin in Enugu she had not spoken to in 3 years. There was a job she had quit, accounts officer at a logistics firm called Rideway Transport on Lagos Island, because Dexter had said a wife of his did not need to work, and she had been young enough and certain enough about him to believe that this was care rather than what it actually was. What she still had was a small brown leather planner her mother had pressed into both her hands in that hospital ward 2 weeks before she died. It was small enough to sit in a coat pocket. The leather had softened and darkened along the spine from years of handling. Her mother had written 3 things on the first page in her careful, upright hand. Adaize, your mind is the only thing they cannot take. Use it every day. She had used it every day. On the morning after he left, she sat at the kitchen table at 5:14 a.m. with the planner open and wrote down what she had, what she owed, and what she needed. She had 43,500 naira in a savings account he had never known about, not hidden, just hers. The account where she had deposited a portion of every salary she received before they married and after, even when he told her she was being overcautious. She owed 18,000 naira in rent by the 1st of the following month. She needed hospital supplies, nappies for the first 6 weeks, and food she could eat with one hand while the other was occupied. She added the columns 3 times. The total came out the same each time. She was short by 6,240 naira. She circled the number. She closed the planner. She picked up her phone and began making calls. She delivered her son at Reddington Hospital on Lagos Island at 7:22 a.m. on a Thursday, 21 days after the door closed. The labor took 11 hours. She was alone for most of them. A student nurse named Chidinma sat with her through the last 4 contractions, held her hand, and did not let go. Adeze named the boy Tobena, which meant in God's hands, because that was exactly where they both were, and she had decided, somewhere around the 8th hour, to be at peace with it. Dexter Owusu Boateng, who was by then living in a flat in Banana Island with a woman named Uju Bright, who had her own portfolio management firm and drove a 2022 white Mercedes-Benz Gley 450, did not come to the hospital. He sent 15,000 naira via bank transfer 8 days after the birth with a message that read, "For the baby." He did not include a phone number. Adeze received the transfer. She wrote it in the planner under the column marked Received. She wrote the date and the amount and the sender. Then she turned the page. She had a child to feed. She had 43,500 naira minus a rent payment. She had a mind nobody had been able to take. She went back to work when Tobena was 9 weeks old. Because waiting was not something she could afford, and because waiting had never been her nature in the first place. She called Rideway Transport. She was told, politely, that her position had been filled. She called 4 other firms over the following 2 weeks. 2 said she was overqualified for the entry-level positions and underqualified for the senior ones. 1 called her back for a second interview, and then went silent after she mentioned that her child was an infant and that she would need to leave at a fixed time on certain days. Another offered her a contract at a salary 40% below what she had been earning 4 years earlier, with a 3-month probationary period and no benefits. The kind of offer that assumed the person receiving it had no other options and no memory. There was a recruiter, a precisely dressed man named Obinna Okoro, whose office smelled of imported cologne and who charged his clients by results and his candidates by their apparent urgency, who looked at her CV for 11 seconds. Then he looked at her face. Then he looked back at the CV. "There's a gap here," he said. 2.5 years, she said. "Why the gap?" "I had a child." He looked at her once more and then made a note on the paper in front of him with his pen. "We're looking for someone who's been active in the market. These things move quickly." He clicked the pen. "We'll be in touch." They were not in touch. There was a woman on her street. Not a friend. More of a presence. A woman named Mrs. Bola, who sold boiled groundnuts from a blue plastic tray near the junction, and had been watching Adeze pass with the baby every morning for 6 weeks without comment, who stopped her one afternoon and said, without preamble, "You're an accountant, aren't you?" She said it the way someone states a fact they have already verified. Adeze said yes. The woman said her brother had a trading business in Apapa and could not read the statements the bank kept sending him. She said he would pay. Not much, but something. Adeze wrote it in the planner that evening. Small trading business, Apapa, 18 months of bank statements. Agreed fee 8,500 naira. She spent 3 hours at his table. She lined up every statement in order and explained what each column meant and where the problems were and what to do about them. The brother followed along carefully, nodding at intervals, and poured her a glass of cold Fanta, and looked at her with the expression of a person watching someone do something they had believed was much harder than it actually appeared. When she left, she had 8,500 naira and something she did not yet have a word for, the understanding that what she was doing was not accounting in the way the firms on Lagos Island meant when they used the word. It was reading. It was the way a doctor reads a set of symptoms and follows them back to their source. She had always known how to read numbers, What she was learning now was how to explain what they were saying to the people who owned them and could not hear them. She registered Okafor Financial Services as a sole proprietorship from the kitchen table in Yaba. The registration cost her 5,500 naira and took 11 days. She designed a simple letterhead using a free template and printed 50 copies at a business center on Herbert Macaulay Way for 300 naira. The letterhead said, Okafor Financial Services, Financial Diagnostics and Consulting. She had chosen the word diagnostics deliberately. She knocked on doors. Most did not open. Some opened and closed quickly. A few stayed open long enough to become something. By the time Tobena was 1 year old, she had 4 clients. By 18 months, she had 7. The work happened in back offices and spare rooms and across kitchen tables at hours that suited the business owner, which were often not the hours that suited Adaize, but she did not make that fact visible. She finished what she started. She wrote reports that contained no unnecessary words. She sent invoices on the day the work was complete and followed up politely at 14 days and again at 21 if payment had not arrived. Tobena's crochet fees were 42,000 naira per term. The landlord raised her rent at the end of the second year from 150,000 naira to 220,000 naira, citing market rates in Yaba. She negotiated him to 195,000 and paid the first installment 3 days early to establish the kind of pattern tends to end future negotiations before they begin. She did not tell him she had been awake until 2:00 a.m., completing the calculations that made the installment possible. She paid on time and turned the page. In her third year, she received a referral from a client who had spoken about her to a logistics company called Hartley Group, 7 branches across Lagos and Ogun State. 2 years of consistent reported losses across 3 of those branches. No explanation that it satisfied anyone. She spent 4 weeks inside their accounts. She found the problem on a Thursday afternoon at 4:12 p.m., a systemic misclassification of delivery costs that had been compounding across fiscal years, invisibly, because the reporting template they had been using since 2019 contained a formula error that nobody had been assigned to verify. She documented the finding in 9 pages. She presented it to the board. The CFO asked her how she had found it. She said, I read it from the beginning. The Hartley report became the work people mentioned when they mentioned her name. But she had noticed something in the 3rd page of the Hartley section while she was working that she had written down only because it appeared too many times to ignore: a set of intercompany transactions with a parent entity. A name that appeared across 4 consecutive fiscal periods, always in the same column, always in the same amount: Vantage Capital Group. She had underlined it twice and moved on. It did not mean anything to her. Not yet. She simply wrote it down, the way she wrote everything down, because the things that appeared too regularly were always worth recording. By the 4th year, Okafor Financial Services had 19 clients and 1 full-time employee, a young man named Emmanuel, who had answered her advertisement for an office assistant, and who, after watching her work for 4 months, had quietly enrolled in accounting certification classes, about which she had said nothing except to adjust his hours to accommodate the schedule. By the 5th year, the planner was on its 7th refill booklet, 118 pages filled front to back in her neat, close handwriting, organized by client, by month, by category. Nobody had taught her this system. She had built it herself, incrementally, because the alternative was losing track, and losing track was not something she was willing to do. Tobena was 5 years old and had started asking about his father. She said, "Your father made a choice. And I made one too. Mine was you. He seemed to accept this the way children accept explanations that feel emotionally complete, even if they are not logically exhaustive. He went back to his crayons. She went back to the planner. In the January of the 5th year, she received a message from a number she did not have saved. It read, "I know I don't have the right to ask. I'd just like to see him." She held the phone for a long time. She set it face down on the desk. She knew what Dexter's situation was, because people who had known them both in those early years told her things she had not asked to be told, in the way people share information they believe is kindness. She knew that Uju Bright had left the Banana Island flat in the 18th month of their relationship, after a disagreement that several people described in different ways, but all agreed had been significant. She knew that Dexter had been working at a company called Vantage Capital Group for 3 years, in a position that had not changed. She knew he was living now in a 1-bedroom apartment in Ikea, and she knew this because someone told her without being asked, and she had listened without asking for more. She did not write any of this in the planner. She wrote his message. She wrote the date and the time, 11:33 p.m., on a Thursday in January, and she recorded it in the column she used for things that arrived without being invited. Then she wrote a single word below it. No. She turned the page. She returned to the Orion shipping audit she had been working on since before Christmas, which had been delayed by a document request that took 2 weeks longer than it should have. She finished the Orion audit 6 weeks later. It was the cleanest report she had ever produced. It found 3 things that had been invisible in 2 consecutive external audits, and laid them out in language that any board member, regardless of financial background, could follow from the first sentence to the last. She would not know until later that the Orion audit would put her name in front of a man she had not yet met. She did not think about that. She simply finished the work. If this story is hitting you the way I think it is, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because what Adeze was about to find out would change what she thought she understood about the distance between where she had started and where she already was. The woman who sold Kelaweli from the bottom of the staircase on Coker Road, Yaba, had been there since before Adeze moved in. Her name was Mama Grace Ndukwe. She was 71 years old. She smelled of groundnut oil and the medicated soap sold in small green sachets at the pharmacy on the next street. Her coal pot was lit every morning by 7 a.m., and her first sale was made before 7:15 to whoever was moving earliest toward the bus stop. She sold Kelaweli for 250 naira a bag, and she had been selling from that spot for 12 years. Before that, she had worked for 21 years as a cleaner in the corporate buildings along the Bordeaux corridor on Lagos Island. She had mopped the floors of boardrooms where decisions were being made, and carried out the bins from offices where things were being decided, and sat in the break rooms of buildings where the names on the doors changed, every 2 or 3 years with a regularity that told you everything. You needed to know about which companies were doing well and which ones were performing the appearance of doing well. She had learned to read the difference. She had been watching Adeze go up the stairs on Coker Road every morning for almost 2 years before she said anything to her directly. On a Tuesday morning in March, Mama Grace looked up from her aluminum tray. "Is the name on the door up there yours?" she asked. Adeze stopped on the bottom step. "Yes." Mama Grace turned the plantain pieces in the hot oil with her flat wooden stick. She did not look up. "There is a man," she said. "He sent someone to ask about the firm that handled the Hartley Group accounts, and the Orion shipping audit, and the Davidel restructuring." She paused. She turned the Kelawel once more. "He is the kind of man who already knows the answer before he sends someone to ask the question." Adeze said, "Who is he?" Mama Grace said, "Chief Osei." Chief Kwadwo Osei was 67 years old. He had built his holding company from a single transport business his father left him in 1987, 6 lorries, a route between Lagos and Ibadan, and a debt of 420,000 naira. What he had now, according to the business journal Adaeze had read on her phone on a Sunday morning 2 years earlier, was a private conglomerate with interests in financial services, real estate, and energy infrastructure across 4 countries, valued at approximately $2.1 billion. He had offices in Lagos, Accra, and London. He did not appear in newspaper photographs. He did not give speeches at conferences. He owned things quietly and ran them precisely, and the people who had worked for him said that the one quality he valued above everything else was the ability to look at a set of numbers and understand what they were actually saying. Not what they were reporting, but what they were saying. He had acquired Vantage Capital Group 8 weeks earlier. The acquisition had been completed on that same Tuesday in March. Mama Grace had heard the name twice in conversations she had not been invited into and had not removed herself from, in the break rooms of buildings she had cleaned for 2 decades, where decisions of this kind had always been made in the same tone of voice that people used when they believed they were speaking to no one important. She had heard it. She had remembered it. And she had been watching the woman with the brown planner come down those stairs every morning for 2 years. "He will call," Mama Grace said. She made her next sale without looking up. His assistant's voice sounds like she has somewhere more important to be. Don't let that confuse you. He himself is a different kind of person. Adaeze stood on the bottom step for another moment. Then she walked upstairs, sat down, and opened the planner to a fresh page. Chief Osei's assistant, a woman named Constance, who had been with him for 19 years, and who delivered information with the economy of someone who had learned that every wasted word costs a compounding amount of time, called at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday. She said, "Chief Osei would like to meet with you regarding a potential engagement. Monday, 10:00 a.m., Bordillon House, 21st floor." She gave the address. She rang off before Adaeze had said more than 3 words. Adaeze wrote it in the planner. She circled the date. She spent the weekend reading everything publicly available about Osei Holdings. She made 3 columns of notes in the planner, underlined 4 things, and crossed out 1. On Monday, she arrived at the Bordillon House building at 9:43 a.m. It was a glass tower that caught the morning light from every angle and held it. The lobby smelled of cedar oil and the particular cool that comes from ventilation that is always exactly right. The receptionist looked at her once and directed her to the 21st floor. Chief Kwadwo Osei was a small man. He was wearing a plain white kaftan. He wore no watch. His office smelled of old paper and warm leather, and something she could not name but recognized as the smell of a room where nothing had been wasted. He stood when she entered. He did not gesture to a chair. He waited until she sat. Then he placed a folder on the desk between them. It contained 11 pages. The pages were printouts, the Hartley Report, the Orion Findings, the Davidale Restructuring Memo, her own work, her own numbers, her own sentences, laid in a row. He put one finger on the Hartley pages. "This," he said, "is not accountancy." He paused. He looked at her steadily. "This is diagnosis." Then, "I need a managing director for Vantage Capital West Africa. The acquisition is complete. Something is wrong in the numbers. The people inside the company cannot see it because they are too close to it. I need someone who will read from the outside." She set the brown leather planner on the desk between them. "Tell me what you're seeing," she said. He told her. She listened without writing. She asked 3 questions. He answered each one without hesitation. She asked a 4th, He was quiet for 4 seconds and then answered that one too. "When can you start?" he said. 5 weeks, she said. "I have clients I need to transition properly." 4, he said. She said nothing. A moment passed. 5, he said. She began on a Monday, 7 years and 14 days after the door on Bourdieu Road closed. She arrived at the Vantage Capital Group offices on Lagos Island at 7:51 a.m. She was wearing a navy blue suit that a tailor on Awolowo Road had fitted across 2 sessions to get the shoulders exactly right. In her bag was the brown planner. Her mother's handwriting was still on the first page. She did not show this to anyone. The staff had been told a new managing director was arriving. They had not been told her name. All 43 of them were gathered in the ground floor conference room when she walked to the front and set the planner on the table. Dexter Owusu Boateng was in the second row. He was 38 years old. He had been at Vantage Capital for 4 years. His title was Senior Portfolio Manager. He was wearing a gray suit. He had put on weight across the shoulders. His hairline had receded approximately 2 centimeters from where it had been the last time she had seen it, 7 years ago, on the other side of a door. He was looking at his phone when she walked in. He looked up when the room went still. He did not recognize her for 3 full seconds. Then his phone shifted in his hands. He caught it before it fell. He held it with both hands and did not move again. She looked at him without stopping. She looked at the whole room. She said, "My name is Adeze Okafor. I am the new managing director for Vantage Capital West Africa." She paused. "We have a significant amount of work to do, and we begin this week. I will be reviewing each department's financial performance individually, starting Wednesday. Team leads, please have your last 2 quarters of figures available. We start at 8. She picked up the planner. She walked out of the room. By the end of her second week, she had read every department in that building with the same precision she had brought to Hartley, to Orion, to Davedale. The Portfolio Management Division was carrying 3 positions whose combined output over 22 months had produced no measurable return on capital deployed. She wrote a restructuring memo, 16 pages, no names, only figures, findings, and a recommendation to reduce the division to 1 senior position supported by 2 junior analysts. She submitted it to Chief Osai's office on a Friday morning at 8:22 a.m. The board approved it on the following Thursday. The affected positions were notified through Human Resources on the Monday after that, at 9 a.m., in individual conversations conducted by the head of HR in her office on the 2nd floor. Dexter Owusu Boateng's conversation lasted 14 minutes. She was not in the building when it happened. She was at a client review in Victoria Island. She did not request to be present. She did not need to be. The numbers had said everything that needed to be said. She had written it down in 16 pages, and the board had read it, and that was the whole of it. Dexter Owusu Boateng thought he was leaving Adeze Okafor with nothing. He had stood in a doorway with a suitcase at 9:47 p.m. and looked at a yellow nightgown and a flickering light and a number in his mind, 43,500 naira, and he had calculated, the way that people who mistake money for power always calculate, that the arithmetic was simple. That she would not last, that the story ended where he stopped writing it. What he could not see was what she was carrying, not the child, what she had in the other hand. You can leave a person on the worst night of their life. You can close the door and take the car and drive until the road runs out and decide that the story is over because you have written yourself out of it. But you cannot reach back through a door you have already closed and take what is in the other person's hands. The mind. The records. The 7 years of mornings at 5:14 a.m. with the planner open on a kitchen table and a column that needed to be added 3 times until it came out right. The referrals that were earned, not asked for. The reports that were 9 pages long and contained no unnecessary words. These are not things that can be left behind. They travel with the person who carries them. They compound, the way the right kind of work always compounds, quietly and without announcement. The world has a habit of looking at a person in a faded yellow nightgown, standing at a kitchen counter with a flickering light above her head, and calculating what she has. It does not ask what she is carrying in the other hand. It does not ask what her mother wrote on the first page of the planner on the counter, or what she has been doing with that instruction every morning for years. It looks at the surface, and it calculates from the surface. And it is wrong, because the surface is not the story. Some people do not build from comfort. They build from the raw material of what they were left with. The exact deficit circled in ink on a fresh page at 5:14 in the morning. The 8,500 naira on a table in a papa that taught her something that no recruiter with an 11-second attention span had ever given her access to. The 4 weeks inside the Hartley accounts that produced 9 pages that a man with $2.1 billion read in one sitting and then asked, immediately, one question. Who wrote this? The people the world overlooks are often already doing the work. Already in the early morning, already adding the columns, already building the thing that the world will eventually have no choice but to look at. Adize Okafor, at 36 years old, had a corner office on the 21st floor of a glass tower 3 blocks from the apartment, where she had once stood barefoot on a tile floor and watched a door close on a Wednesday night in October. Tobena, who was 6 years old and who had never been told the full story, but who could feel the particular steadiness of a mother who has not been broken, left a drawing on her desk that Tuesday morning. A woman in a blue suit standing at the top of something tall, surrounded by papers. Her name written at the bottom in the careful, uneven letters of a child who had just learned to form them. She put it in the planner. Now one question before I go. If the person who walked out on you on the worst night of your life was sitting across a table from you 7 years later, and you had the power this time, and they did not, would you let the numbers speak? Or would you feel the need to say something yourself? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about quiet strength, hidden power, and the people the world writes off until they have no choice but to look up. I'll see you in the next one.